My name is Elizabeth Mann. I'm a fellow in the Brown Center on Education Policy at the Brookings Institution. I'm a political scientist by training, and I study presidential policymaking at the subnational level, as well as the politics of education. President Trump's education budget is complicated, and there are a lot of moving pieces to keep track of. However, there are a couple of main themes that we can see and a couple of specific areas that we can focus on. So first, what a lot of people have been talking about and reporting on is that there are a number of very deep cuts proposed both in higher education and in elementary and secondary education. At the same time, a lot of the main programs of federal funding, as proposed, would be stable. So for example, the Title I program in elementary and secondary education, which is a main funding source, would be at a relatively stable level under this proposal compared to the prior year. Similarly, in the context of higher education, federal Pell Grants, which provide financial aid to students attending higher education, would also be similar to the previous year. However, a lot of the cuts that have been proposed would affect a number of different programs, both in higher education and elementary and secondary education. Title I is a federal spending program that provides funds to school districts that have high concentrations of students from low-income families. President Trump's budget proposes a new program within Title I called Focus. This is a program that would provide funds to districts that are implementing certain school choice programs. However, Focus would not be administered through the normal formula grant that is used to disperse Title I funds to school districts. So for this reason, even though the Focus program would be funded in this proposal with $1 billion, that's not necessarily the same as adding $1 billion to existing Title I spending. Basically, Title I spending would be relatively stable compared to the prior year. If you chose to count Focus as additional Title I funds, that's when you would see an increase in the program. President Trump's budget proposes a number of significant cuts to programs that fund higher education and that provide financial assistance to students in higher education. So a lot of people are concerned that in total, this funding proposal would actually make college affordability much more difficult for a number of students. The budget proposes level funding for Pell Grants. Pell Grants are what you would think of when you think of typical financial aid provided by the federal government to students for higher education. The Trump education budget proposes cutting funds for the federal work-study program in half. The federal work-study program provides funds to students who are enrolled in college and in higher education to provide funding for them to work while they attend school. The federal work-study program in this budget, if it was funded at the level proposed, it would actually be the lowest level of funding that this program has ever received in the history of the Department of Education. There are also other cuts that have been proposed in different programs in higher education. So for example, the Trump budget proposes cuts to career and technical education as well. So if you think about this from the perspective of a state policymaker who's trying to figure out how to fund higher education, the sum total of these proposed cuts means that there would be a lot of strains placed on states' budgets in this area.